Forget gold and jewels. One of the greatest treasures for pirates was food. But life at sea rotted everything. Meat turned foul within days, bread filled with worms, and water stank of mold. For men trapped on the ocean for weeks, hunger was worse than cannons. And sometimes to survive, pirates turned to a trick that sounds unthinkable. They tested rotten meat by looking for maggots. It was simple and grotesque. If maggots were crawling on the meat, it meant it was still safe to eat. If there were none, it meant the flesh was poisoned, deadly with invisible rot. Yes, the same crawling worms that would make most people gag were actually a sign of life. Maggots fed only on flesh free of the most dangerous toxins. To pirates, their presence was a disgusting green light. The meat wouldn't kill you. This wasn't about choice, it was survival. Imagine the scene: a pirate crew starving after weeks at sea, opening a barrel of meat swarming with larvae. The sight was revolting, but to them, it was relief. Better to eat crawling meat than die with an empty stomach. This is the wild truth of pirate life, where hunger forced men to trust maggots more than their eyes, their noses, or even their captains. And as we'll uncover, this grotesque test saved countless lives on the high seas. Life at sea was a war against hunger. Pirates weren't dining on fresh banquets of meat and fruit. They were choking down rations that spoiled faster than they could eat them. Ships carried barrels of salted beef and pork, but under the blazing sun, the meat sweated in its brine. Within weeks, it turned slimy, green, and crawling with worms. Bread came as hard biscuits called hardtack, so tough you could break teeth on them, and so infested with weevils that sailors joked the worms were just extra protein. Fresh food was rare. Pirates might steal fruit or livestock from raided ships, but once at sea, the fruit rotted in days, and the animals often died from neglect. Water was no better. Barrels grew algae, stank like sewage, and carried diseases. These conditions killed thousands of sailors. Scurvy rotted their gums, dysentery weakened them, and food poisoning claimed those desperate enough to eat rotten flesh. Hunger hollowed men's eyes and broke their spirits. Pirates faced a brutal choice: starve or risk eating food that might kill them. And that's where the maggot trick came in. A test so grotesque, yet so reliable, it sometimes meant the difference between life and death. The sea was merciless, and for pirates, survival meant trusting not kings or gods, but the crawling judgment of maggots. Starving pirates had little choice but to gamble with their food, and out of desperation came a survival hack so revolting it sounds like a nightmare: the maggot trick. The logic was simple. If a piece of meat was truly poisonous, corrupted with toxins too deadly even for insects, maggots would avoid it. But if the meat swarmed with writhing larvae, it meant one thing: life could still feed on it. And if maggots could live, pirates believed, so could they. The sight was disgusting. Pirates would pry open a barrel, peer into the slimy mess, and look for the squirming white insects. Sometimes they scraped them away, sometimes they ate the meat as it was, crawling and alive. For men who had faced cannon fire, even this test of courage brought shivers. Accounts from the age describe hardened sailors tearing into maggot-filled pork, chewing fast before their stomachs revolted. Others gagged, vomiting after swallowing just one bite, but hunger pushed them on. To pirates, the trick wasn't about bravery, it was about survival. It was a rule passed in whispers: if it wriggles, you live. If it doesn't, you die. The maggot trick saved countless lives, sparing crews from deadly poisoning when their only choices were grotesque meat or starvation. It was survival at its most primal, trusting the lowest creatures of the sea to keep men alive. At first glance, the maggot trick sounds like madness, but beneath the horror lies real science. Maggots are the larvae of flies. These creatures thrive only in specific conditions: fresh, decaying meat that still carries enough nutrients to support life. If meat is too far gone, poisoned by certain bacteria or toxins, maggots won't touch it. So when pirates saw meat crawling with larvae, they took it as proof. The flesh might be foul to the eye, but to nature's hungriest scavengers, it was still fuel. In other words, maggots were the testers. Their survival meant the meat wasn't yet deadly. Modern science backs this up. Certain bacterial toxins in spoiled food, like botulism, can be lethal to humans. These toxins don't attract flies. In fact, they repel them. So meat with no larvae could be far more dangerous than meat swarming with them. Of course, this didn't mean the food was safe in the modern sense. Pirates still risked parasites, disease, and foodborne illness. But compared to starving, the maggot test gave them better odds. In a strange twist, maggots were not just warnings, but also healers. In later centuries, surgeons used maggots to clean wounds, because the larvae only eat dead flesh, leaving healthy tissue untouched. Pirates may not have known the science, but they understood one thing. Maggots could mean survival. It's a grim irony that one of nature's most revolting creatures kept the most feared men of the seas alive. The maggot trick was only one part of pirate survival. Their diets were a mix of desperation and luck. Whatever the sea, the ship, or their raids could provide. The staple was hardtack, tough, rock-like biscuits baked to last months. They were so hard pirates often had to soak them in water or rum just to chew. Unfortunately, they were also crawling with weevils. Pirates joked that if your biscuit didn't move, it wasn't fresh. Salted fish and pork were another mainstay. Preserved in brine, they were edible for months, until heat and dampness turned them slimy. Fresh catches of fish or turtles broke the monotony when the crew got lucky with nets or harpoons. Citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, limes, were a rare and precious treasure. Pirates knew they kept scurvy at bay, even if they didn't understand the science of vitamin C. Some captains demanded they be stolen whenever possible. When pirates raided coastal towns or captured merchant ships, their diets transformed overnight. Suddenly, the crew feasted like kings: fresh bread, sugar, coffee, chocolate, even wine and fine cheeses. But those luxuries never lasted. Within days, it was back to stale biscuits and salted pork. Sometimes they kept livestock on board: chickens, goats, even pigs. But animals often died in storms or from neglect, leaving the crew with little but bones and feathers. In the end, pirate survival meant adapting to whatever they could get. From the crawl of maggots to the sweetness of stolen fruit, every bite was a gamble, but one they had to take to live another day at sea. For all their survival tricks, pirates lived one meal away from disaster. Food kept them alive, but it also killed them. Food poisoning was a constant fear. Rotten meat that passed the maggot test could still carry diseases. Crews sometimes dropped dead within hours of a bad meal, clutching their stomachs in agony. Scurvy was another invisible killer. Without citrus, gums swelled and bled, teeth rotted, and men weakened until they couldn't even pull a rope. Whole crews were crippled not by cannon fire, but by lack of fruit. Starvation haunted every voyage. Storms wrecked supplies, barrels rotted faster than expected, or raids failed to bring plunder. Pirates grew thin and hollow-eyed, bones jutting through skin. Some turned to eating leather or boiled rope. Then there were deadly mistakes. A crew might believe meat was safe because of maggots, only to discover too late that the larvae had been fooled by unseen toxins. Or men fought over food, killing each other for scraps of bread. Even water betrayed them. A single foul barrel could spread dysentery, leaving men too weak to fight when enemies closed in. Pirates lived in a world where every bite was a gamble. Sometimes the dice landed in their favor. Other times, death waited in the very food they prayed would save them. And yet, for all the danger, they kept eating, drinking, and surviving, because the sea had only one law: endure or die. In the end, the story of pirates and their food is not about feasts or delicacies. It's about survival. The maggot trick was disgusting, yes, but it was also genius in its simplicity. It turned the lowest, most revolting creatures of the sea into unlikely guardians of life. If the meat wriggled, you lived. If it didn't, you starved. This brutal method, along with stale hardtack, salted fish, and stolen fruit, painted the real picture of pirate survival. It was not glamorous, it was desperate, filthy, and often deadly. But it also shows the toughness of these men. Pirates could face storms, battles, starvation, and even disease, and still find a way to endure. They bent the rules of nature, turning maggots, of all things, into allies. Centuries later, the tale of the maggot trick still makes us shiver. It strips away the romance of the pirate myth and reminds us that survival on the seas was never pretty. It was raw, desperate, and often revolting. And maybe that's why the legend of pirates endures. Because they weren't just outlaws. They were survivors, willing to do whatever it took. Even if that meant eating meat crawling with maggots. That's the wild truth about pirate life. They lived by no king, no law, not even by the rules of nature. They survived on their own terms, one disgusting bite at a time.